Hello, welcome to the March 3rd, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo, and I am the host of the live stream. And if you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can ask questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could simply ask your questions in the live chat field. And let me just mute. Hang on just one second. Sorry about that. All right, and so if you're not attended, so you could ask questions by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de or asking in the chat when asking questions. If you could specify which level of Cubase you're running, so if it's version 10, 10.5, 11, or 12, which version, which level of Cubase, so whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, or other Steinberg programs, and which operating system. That would be helpful. If you don't see an immediate response to your question, if you could simply refrain from asking the same question over and over again, I'll try my best to catch up with all the questions, but realize that there could be a delay by the time I get through the question. So if just kind of asking the same question over and over again will just kind of slow down the whole process. So I'd appreciate that. We should have all of the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top with timestamps, so you could easily kind of search and navigate directly to a particular topic and kind of scan through it quickly. If you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to create that website for us. And you could search, I think it's just around 25,000 topics that we've done. And we'll be celebrating our third anniversary of kind of COVID live streams coming up in 2 weeks from today. So, but use that as a resource. We want to give a special thanks to Jan. We also want to give special thanks to Agent K and to Jazz Dude for their work as moderators, often helping people before I can get to them. And if we have any nefarious bots that are within the session, they think they do that and they're not Steinberg employees. They just kind of do this out of the kindness and generosity is to make it a better environment. Also, we want to give Jazz Dude a special thanks for all of his work with the Cubase Nation Discord. So it's a wonderful resource for Steinberg users. Once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work as a product specialist, basically, for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor of Steinberg products, and I'll be the host. And I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. One thing that we're going to be doing, I'll ask a favor of people. Steinberg is actually going to start promoting and marketing the live streams. So if you have found the live streams, the Club Cubase live streams helpful, and you want to let people know, if you could do just a little video, it could be on your camera, it could be on a webcam, and just do like 10, 15 seconds of, if you want to do a video of how Club Cubase has helped you. That'd be really helpful. So we figured we want to do some marketing, and we figured we would actually get people that attend the live streams to contribute. So you could share a video link to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, put it on a WeTransfer or some similar file sharing service. So that would be appreciated. All right. So with that, we will go ahead and begin. Okay, so we see from Deal K, first question. How can I get rid of missing files with question marks in the media bay? Rescanning drives folders didn't work. So I'm not sure if I've come across kind of missing file references. But check to see if when you go into media bay, so let's say if I wanted to jump to this computer, let me go to documents. And I'll just select project. So if you can determine kind of what folder it's in, so maybe if you moved content over, perhaps if we go to your particular project here. So see if when you actually select a particular file, you'll see kind of a file path where that is going to be where that's going to be stored, and see if you uncheck the particular files. If you notice that you have a lot of files with question marks in particular folders, maybe you could tell MediaBay not to look into those particular folders. But let me know if it's like presets or audio files, or like MIDI files, MIDI loops, or what type of media it is. So, all right, so next question. Hi, Greg. In the right panel, VSTi favorites does not show Ozone 10, but the VST plugin manager shows Ozone 10 under favorites. All right, so let's say we go to our VST plugin manager here. All right, so I'm not sure if you've created a particular, so make sure, one, that you have this, like you could have a VST plugin collection, but make sure that that is the active VST plugin collection. So I'm not sure if you created a favorites folder and moved it over. But, generally, like if I wanted to go to this, let me go to so let's say this is my favorites. When I go to my VSTi, so if you go to media, and let's say we go to VST instruments, so we could see that we could have kind of like our different favorites collection here. So, make sure that you have the same, kind of the same actual preferences, like the same VST plugin manager selected here that you do for within the MediaBay. So, or within the VST plugin manager rather. So make sure that these things are kind of in sync with each other. So let's say if we go to Steven, that now we could see that this will change. Let's see if I change this to Mark, and we go back to our VST plugin manager. So you may just have to select to make sure that this list is in sync with all of the VST plugin manager collections. So let me know if you added like a favorites folder manually. So if you come over here, if you created your own collection, but if I switch this to, let's say, switch this collection to Simon, I'll come here. So that looks like it stays in sync, but if I change it from here and we go back to our VST plugin manager, it looks like that isn't in sync. So make sure that you actually select the plugin collection from here, and then that will sync it. But if you could switch it here independently of whatever this selection is in your VST plugin collection. So let me know if that helps. All right, so we see from DK, I have a controller set up. Question: I have a controller set up to show and hide automation on selected track. I would love to set it as toggle, but unfortunately, it seems to be possible with 2 separate commands only. So let's take a look, see if we could open that up. So, some parameters are toggleable, but let's see if we could get it going with our MIDI remote. Okay, so I'm just going to assign this to this particular button. All right, and let me just all right, so we could have it two separate functions. Let's see if maybe we could do it in the project logical editor. I'm not sure if we can, but we'll take a look. Yeah, because I think that on, let me just, I don't see it as a track operation. Yes, I think it's going to be the same, but I think if you have a CC121, there is a particular function that would open and close the automation by hitting the left and right arrows simultaneously. So if I come here, let's just, so I could open it and a separate command to close, but so it looks like it's separate commands, but on the CC121, I could open up the try one more command because I think it's maybe the same thing as opening and closing folders. Let me see if that carries over. Yeah, so there's one little mode on the CC121 that will allow it to kind of open and close. Okay. What you could do, yeah, so set this up. Okay, so if you wanted to do that, assign, so go to your controller setup, and what you want to do is to assign it to toggle selected track under folding. So now we could just take, so once that is assigned, so again, toggle selected track under folding, I could take my track and that would open up and close the automation with a single command. And if I have a number of different projects here, and let's say that they're in folders, so I'll move the selected tracks to a new folder. That if I have this, I could take that same command and open and close folders or open and close automation lanes. So go to your studio setup, or just in the controller here, and you want to go to folding. toggle selected track, and use that as a command, and then that way you could open and close the automation lane with a single command without having to have a separate open or close function. Okay. All right, so we see Alexander Plasko on. All right, so we see Mike Weiser ask question, is there a function to highlight audio events using the scissor tool, like how you can draw a box over events with the arrow tool, but with the scissor tool instead? Okay, so let me just copy some of these events out. So if we just, so I have the scissor tool selected here, so now I could select, so I just kind of draw like the lasso around. So right now we have this is like a 2-measure loop, and if I wanted to cut this at 1 measure instead, I could just come right over here, hold down the Alt or Option key, and we could at that point just kind of split. So if you wanted to select multiple events with the scissors tool, you could do that and then cut across multiply selected events as well. So you can say I want to cut right there. So just kind of the same way. So let me know if that's what you wanted to do, but you can select multiple events and cut across as you see fit. All right, so Best Korean Jesus asks, is there a way to keep Hallian edit page the same for all instruments? So depending on, so let's say if we go to like our Hallian Sonic here, and if we are going to different instruments, so like when we go to edit, so let's say at this point, if I load up a sound from Eagle, and let's just jump back. Say, okay, I want one from FM Lab here. So at this point, kind of whatever the instrument is selected, it will show the edit based on the instrument or the library. So it may be, and you know, if we have this set for multiple, you know, if we have a project that has multiple instances, so let's say if I could jump here to this project and activate it. So these are going through like one instance of Hallian, but there may be different libraries. So if I come over here, let's say if I go to edit, and then as I select different tracks in Hallian, it will synchronize. And so when I go to this, it is a different instrument, but you know, these will stay in sync depending on what is selected. So if we have instruments, and most of these are in HSO, the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra, but I think if we go to this, it's going to be just inside of the artist library, so that will automatically select. So let me know if this is what you want to stay the same, but that will just reflect on whatever instrument that you're using. So if you wanted to all be the same, you could just use all the same instrument. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding. Wonderful to see Peter from Montreal. So wishing everyone a happy Friday. All right, we see Stefan from Sweden. Thanks for being on. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right, so we see from Best Korean Jesus, just ask, how do I make rough ticks in quantize be positive numbers only, meaning I don't want it to go backwards ever? Okay, so let's say when we go to our quantize panel, so I think it's always going to go to the nearest so I don't know of a way to have it only be a negative or positive value only. So I think it's just going to be a number of ticks. And if it's, 7 ticks early or 7 ticks late, that it would use the value for 7 ticks. So it doesn't seem like there's a negative or positive value here. So I don't know of a way to have that only do for positive. But I could pass that along as a feature suggestion as well. All right, we have Uno Memento checking in from Lapland in northern Finland. So I think he's maybe on a ski vacation. All right, so we see Drazi Eternal asks how to add and remove macros. So macros are actually part of key commands. So if you, when I share my macros for people, what I have to do is just share my key commands. So these aren't separated from the key commands. So all you'd have to do is to just save presets. So often when I create a macro, I always kind of show it visually because people may not want the key commands that I've created to override their particular key commands. So maybe in the future, I've kind of asked for a way to have the macros be kind of a separate entity so that it's not contingent on key commands. But at this point, you would just save, so if you wanted someone's macros, they would have to share their particular key commands with you. And then once you import that, then the key commands will show up. And then all those macros will be transferred over. All right, so we just see from Orly asks a question, how do I trim a sample that needs to repeat while not damaging the first note of the sample? Okay, so let me just jump to a different project here. All right, so I'm not sure if you're trimming it kind of from the start or from the beginning. So let's say if you're trimming, so let's say I'll just turn off my snap by hitting the letter J. So if I was trimming the end, and now if I want it to select the range, so let's say, a lot of times what I think what this might be doing is, let's say if we trim this sample and then if we duplicate that, this maybe isn't starting on beat, and the more we duplicate, the more kind of off that it gets. So instead of starting, so we could see that as we go on, that the time that's being copied. So if we had trimmed a sample like this, but we still want to duplicate, I would select the range and then hit Control or Command plus the letter D, and then you could duplicate the range, which may include portions where there is no audio file, and then that range would automatically go directly onto the file. So once again, just come and say, okay, I want to just, so let me know if this is what you want to do, is to take this and have the first beat line up as it's being copied or duplicated. So as we do this, we can see that we could duplicate that range. And again, as we duplicate the range, then it's going to stay kind of on the grid, as opposed to duplicating the trimmed event. And if you duplicate the trimmed event, then it's going to be kind of off. So as we do that, we can see that we could lose time every single time that we duplicate. So let me know if that's what you want it to do. All right, so we see from Cubase X, hello Greg, thank you for these fantastic streams. You're welcome. And he wishes that everyone is doing well. All right, so we have Max Arrington from Houston, Texas. My brother lives in Houston with his family. Been there many times. All right, and Jazz Dude points out, which I should mention, there is a Cubase promotion going on, 40% off. So if you're looking for upgrades, updates, to get into Cubase for your first time, you want your friends to get into Cubase so they can be running better software, it's a great time for them to jump in. All right, so I have a question from Paul Evans. Hi, Greg. I have my mod wheel disabled about a year ago. I want to be re-enabled, but I don't remember how. I'm using Cubase 11 Artist, so there's a good chance that you may have done it with preferences. So let's try to come here to preferences, and we'll go to MIDI filter. So MIDI to MIDI filter, and you'll probably just see, and you may just have like controller, and it may be set to like number 1 add. So you may see something like this, and this would filter out your modulation wheel. So if you see that, so once again, preferences to MIDI filter, and then at this point you could just say select it and hit remove, and then that will probably be filtering out your modulation wheel. So that's probably the one way. It could also be with, and this will look different in version 11, but you have also an input transformer where we could set this globally. So we say, and this will look different, but it could be the input transformer is set to automatically, we'll say we want to filter out type is equal to controller, and then we'll say value 1 of the controller is 1 for modulation. So at this point in the input transformer, you maybe just have that enabled, and you could just disable the input transformer, and that's a little, in version 11, that's a little squiggly line that shows up right here. It kind of changed in version 12, but so if you don't see it in your preferences, look in the input transformer, and it's probably one of those 2 places where it's being filtered out. All right, so we have Dan is joining from Sweden. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we have a question from Patrick. Hi, Greg. Piano and bass, control select both tracks inside key editor. All parts select some notes of piano and move that to bass instrument. Is it possible? Change that part to other instruments. Okay, so let's say, so I'm here. Let's say we have an electric piano part. All right. Okay. All right, so let me just revert this quickly. All right. Just open up the instrument. All right, not sure why it's not playing, but let me just. Okay, so let's say we'll call this part bass. Okay, so I'm going to just create parts here. Okay, so I'm going to select both events and then go into my key editor. And then I'm going to select, let's say I'll select these notes here. So I'm going to copy. So just a edit, copy, command plus control plus the letter C. So right now we see that this is the electric piano. I'm going to go to my bass voice here. And let's say paste. So now if we wanted to, so with both of them open, we could just see the notes that were copied directly over. So again, and then we could assign that to different instruments. So if you just have like a blank part, open both events and go into the editor, go full screen. You don't have to, but we can say, okay, I want to take these notes, copy, and you'll see all the active parts here, and then say, okay, I want to paste. And I'll just do paste at origin. So now at this point, when we see our bass part, we could just see the selected notes that are copied over just like that. So let me know if that's helpful, Patrick. It's great to see you on the live stream as always. All right, so we have Arif B checking in from Holland. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Uno Memento so far north that he saw Santa last week in Lapland. And he said if you want presents for next Christmas, you have to press the like button. So Santa sounds pretty wise. All right, wonderful. Let's see Spike Williams from Wales, from Rhondda Valley. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. It's a question about Cubase 12 Pro and UR44C. Can I monitor UR44C input signal all the time from Cubase without creating audio tracks to monitor it, even when Cubase is running and no project is open? I think you'd be able to, if you wanted to. It depends on the settings. So if you go into like the UR, I have a UR24C, which is the interface that I use. And if I go into the settings on my URC, there's a loopback mode. So, it could be, so if you wanted that to be a loopback mode for being able to play, to monitor signal while Cubase is playing, you could obviously do it while Cubase isn't open. But you may have to enable loopback mode. But if you could tell me, maybe if you could share more of the use case and why you want to do that. All right, so we see when is the new Cubase update coming? The development team usually doesn't announce when updates are coming, but I can tell you that, the developers are very active and busy working on stuff. All right, so we see from Best Korean Jesus says Cubase live stream is what got me to switch to Cubase. It's crazy how well versed I am in 2 years. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so if you just say that and put it in a video and share it with me, Best Korean Jesus, I would love to have that. So that's great. So, and it's always wonderful to see you on and to see how your questions have progressed so much. All right, so we see a question. How can I add categories to MediaBase? So the categories are kind of fixed, but you can add your own kind of user categories if you wanted to. So let's say if we go to MediaBay, and you'll see this little settings wheel here. And at this point, once you see the settings, you click on plus, And then you could say, okay, I want to add a new attribute. So we can say, okay, I want this to be a yes, no. We'll say text. So let's say you get like a sample CD. There's like 4 good drum loops out of 100. You know, you could just say something like, we'll just say awful. And then we could have a database name as awful. And now if you wanted to come over here, you could just, you know, say, okay, I want to see my, you know, I could look for audio files that aren't awful or that are awful or whatever you want it to be. So once we come over here, we could say, okay, awful. And we could say yes or no, or put in your own text. So you could put in your own attributes and you could search for those like a category. But sometimes, you know, people may take, you know, 16 different versions of reggae or, you know, especially maybe more worship music. There could be so many different ones. And the problem is that many times when you're using categories that are kind of expanded, that they're not then recognized in other programs and other metadata. So, but you could create your own attribute, again, by going to the settings and clicking on the plus sign, and then you could create your own attributes, where do you want it to be text, yes, no, or numbers. All right, so we have IOL says, greetings, Greg, and Cubase and everyone. So thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Jesse Jose just says, think about 4 years. I've learned a lot. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters. We missed you on the Zoom meetup on Tuesday, but we had a wonderful group of people. It was great to meet new people as well. All right, so we have Romantis Leonovicius saying all the best, greetings, all the best from London. So thanks for being on. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. Okay, so I think you're okay. All right. So we see a question. Is it possible to set the mixer faders as pre-gain control by linking the faders with pre-gain control in each channel to do a quick rough, then bypass them all at the same time? Thanks. So not really, but one of the things that you can do in the mixer that a lot of people, you know, may miss. So I'm not sure if this is like a tracking thing more, but you know, if you know, because the fader is going to be, you know, the fader, so it's not going to be pre-fader or post-fader because, you know, kind of the fader is the fader. But if we come over and say I have a number of input channels, so let me just open up project that has a lot of input channels. I think Amos Moses does. All right, so, you know, these are our input channels. So if you wanted to have faders that were pre-gain as you're recording, you could adjust, you know, you could adjust these particular input gains, and this would happen before the channels hit. And let's say if I wanted to come over to my pre-gain on the channel, we could, you know, pick up for MIDI remote mapping. So let's say if I wanted to go to this, and we'll say apply the mapping. So if you wanted to do it where the pre-gain could be adjusted from like a control surface, you could do it like that as well. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Okay, so we see a question, and we see from 1875, followed by, it looks like maybe Asian letters. Sorry for my ignorance. And the question is, could you teach me how to change the time signature 4/4 to 12, 8/6/8 as compound? Okay, so let's do just a new project. Okay, so let's add a signature track. Okay, so we'll just come here, add signature track. So if we want to start in 4/4, and now let's say we want it to be 12, so just type in 12-8, and then we could do 6/8, and then let's say back to 4/4. So as we do this, we can now, and I'll just turn on my click track. Now, if we wanted to kind of change these, we could go to different click patterns and say, okay, I want that to come here. And let's say, so if I wanted to emphasize kind of different pulses, or now, if you wanted this to kind of just have those different pulses, but not have the actual meter change, but maybe have the pulses change, what you could do is say, okay, I want it to, at this point, go to 4/4, and then we could go to our click patterns, and then we could say, okay, as 6/8. And then I wanted this to be quintuplets for one measure, and I wanted this pulse to be as double tempo, and I wanted this one to be half tempo. I wanted this one to be back to normal 4/4. So as we play, so it's still 4/4, but the click, so 5. So at that point, and if I want to take this, and, so we could do all sorts of different time signatures like that. So, or maybe it's the same time signature, but if we, again, just wanted to come here, we could, create your own custom patterns as well for these. So, so let me know if that's helpful for you. And thanks for being on the live stream. All right, wonderful to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California. We also see Antias and John Barry. All right, and we have Larry just checking in from Brampton, Canada. So thanks for being on. All right, so we see a question. Is it possible to see all used MIDI modifiers like mod wheel, volume, etc. automatically when I open the key MIDI editor by default? So I don't think it's going to do it by default. But let's see if we could just add an instrument track here. All right, and I'm just going to draw some notes in. All right, so let's draw some modulation. And expression. All right, so I think that when we go here, we could say, all right, so now when we do this, let's say, all right, and And for this, we'll switch it to the drum editor and our lovely score editor. I'll go back to our key editor. So I want to say, all right. So what you can do, what most people end up doing is just setting up, is adding it and then saving it as a preset. So I did one for Nari Soul, where at this point, every time we open it up, that we could see, so if at this point, let's say I want to click on plus and say, okay, I want to see modulation. I wanted to see volume and expression. So let's say I want those to always be visible, and I'll just kind of change the height here. And then I'm just going to come over here. Let's create a controller. I'll save this as a preset. So we'll call it Brian. And let's see if I save this maybe as the name default, if that does anything. So duplicate track. All right, and this, let's say I go to my score editor, drum editor real quick. All right, so we'll go to our key editor, and now when we double click, and let's make it kind of in the large one. That I think that once you have this set up, you could save the presets like that, but I don't know of a way to automatically show everything. But if most of the time you're going to be working with very common ones, and then if you open up that editor again, it's going to kind of show, once we kind of go back and forth between different parts. Let's say, okay, I have this as Charles Gaskell, and then if I want it to go to this part, and we open it again, you could just kind of switch between these, and you could recall these via like a keyboard shortcut as well. But if you quickly wanted to see everything, like if you think you had like a Rogue controller, that's when looking at it in kind of the list editor is really, a powerful thing to do as well. But I'll play around with it and see if there's like, you could maybe set a default and then at that point have it automatically show. But once you have that kind of set up like within the template, then it will automatically work. All right, so we have Peter checking in from Austin, Texas. So I miss going to Austin. A lot of good friends there. Spending time at Eric Johnson's studio and Ray Benson's studio Bismo, which I don't think is around anymore, unfortunately. Great room. All right, so you see from Best Green Jesus, he just says, like the ticks, he just wanted to do something like creating strums. So if you wanted to, one tool that you could use for kind of creating strums, let me just add, let's say, chord track here quickly. Okay, so let's All right, so if we have a number of chords like this, is if you grab this tool, kind of the trim tool, and hold down kind of the Alt or Option key, that you could just kind of very easily graphically adjust. And if you want it to be more, so you could just kind of draw in strums if you want to do it kind of that way. So, try holding down kind of the Alt or Option key, and then you could just simply so again, just try that as well, and then you could just kind of experiment with some different strumming styles pretty easily. We see Jazz Dudes had a lazy Friday. He's remapping his Akai MIDI controller. All right. So we have Salve from Black Forest, Germany. Thanks for being on. Okay, so we see from Drazi Eternal says, no, not those macros, the sound macros tab in Hallion. So let's say, and it says Hallion 6. I don't have Hallion 6 anymore, but let's take a look. And let's... All right, so if you wanted to, so I'm not sure when you say like the macros, if it's, so if you wanted to save this, so we'll give it a name. So some of them, because try, so if you want to export multi-programs or save a multi-program, so let's say, okay, we want this to be, all right, so say we'll cut. So now just double click here, and then all of those would be recalled for you. So let me know if that's what you want to do, if you want to save kind of a multi-program, if that's what you mean by the macros there. All right, so we see question. If I use third-party plugins in a project, then sometimes Cubase shuts down at random, but I don't know why. So a lot of times, some of those plugins could be causing system instabilities. So a lot of times, if you use plugins that are causing different problems, so it's unfortunately kind of a high percentage of crashes that we get from different crash dumps are going to be generated by third-party plugins. All right, so we see from KS Germania, says he bought a Korg MIDI control, bought it in 2005. It was in the box, runs 4 years. I wonder if the MIDI Korg still works. So I found a little Korg Nano control. I bought one just to be able to use on live streams, and just automatically kind of pops up and works great. So anything that transmits MIDI, if the drivers still work, then you should be all set. If it's still able to pass MIDI through the MIDI drivers. All right, so we see question, what tool do I use to trim the beginning of a sample? Okay, so if we want to trim samples, we could, as you selected the event, you can see the tool. I'll turn my snap off. So if I wanted to just trim, I'll just move this starting at measure 2. So we could just come right over here and trim the samples, or if you wanted to move the events, you could do sizing moves, time stretch. So if you wanted kind of the end to fall where it will, but the beginning you want to hear. So there's different modes. There's also kind of a sizing applies time stretch. So you say I need that to fit into that amount of space, and it'll time compress the files. Or you could just come right over here and trim. You could cut with the scissors tool and erase, or use like a range selection tool. So you can say, okay, I want to get rid of this, and at that point just hit the delete or backspace key. So if you wanted to just come right over here and say I didn't like that, you could just use the range tool, select, and hit the backspace or delete key on your computer keyboard. So let me know if that's helpful. A couple different ways to do that. See, Castermania says he has Cubase 12 LEAI, 32 tracks, 4 effects per channel. It works really well, so it's great. Yeah, and you see Jazz Du's thing, check out the promotion to jump up to elements. All right, so we have Bruce Bruton checking in from Simi Valley. So he came in to smash the like button. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see, is it possible to sidechain one frequency range from the full spectrum to another audio source? So if you wanted to just take, so if you have I think you could just do it with the frequency EQ. So let's say if we have our frequency EQ here, so we'll just go to EQ. frequency. And at this point, we could choose to do, so we could choose to do side chaining. So if we come here, we could say, okay, I want to side chain band 3 only and add a side chain source. So at that point, we could only have, the particular frequencies pass through there. You could also utilize probably like a multi-band compressor if you wanted to come to dynamics. And let's get to your multi-band compressor. So we could activate side chaining kind of globally on this. And if we only wanted to pass the audio, we could go to the side chain and say, I only want the side chain to be in these particular frequencies. And if you wanted to go even, to carve frequencies out, you could go to the Imager plugin and just solo particular frequency ranges on a track. So you can say, okay, while I'm here, I want to solo this particular frequency range so that only this part of the audio will get processed through a different effect. So a number of multi-band plugins or frequency EQ will allow you to do that. All right, so we see from Patrick, it says, thank you, Greg, exactly what we needed with Cubase MIDI editing. So I guess the copying between two different parts. It says that's generating and cultivating his creativity, so that's good. All right, so we have RDR says, hello, my first Cubase live stream. Welcome, and we're glad you could join us, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have on your Cubase or Steinberg products, and we hope to see you on future live streams. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from PETA, looking into freeing up space, is it okay to delete the files that are .bak into folders of songs, tracks without creating an issue? So yeah, you could do that. Realize that those are just kind of backup files. So if you're confident that you don't need those, you could delete them, but if you're freeing up space, one of the things that you could do in your project is if you go to your pool window or just come over and, within each project, one fast way of doing it is just to remove unused files. And then that could place them into the pool's trash folder. And then at that point, you could empty trash and you could have it removed from pool or removed from disk. So if you, remove unused folder audio files, that may get you there quicker as a way to free up space. All right, so you see from Jazzy Eternal, I remember when I got my first Cubase program in 1999. My PC was too slow for it, but then I disappeared from Earth until Cubase 5 and disappeared again until Cubase 10, waiting for Cubase console. So we're glad that you're back. All right, so we have Omyong Music Lab checking in from UAE. Thanks for being on the live stream with us today. All right, so we see a question from Patrick. Is it possible to only apply swing only to selected notes, like on second and fourth beats? So, all right, so let's take a look, show you how to do that. All right, so you may not necessarily notice the swing only on particular beats, but let's come over All right, so we have 2 bars. And let's go into our logical editor. So what we want to do in a logical editor is to select the events and then to apply, let's say, quantize to those. So let's say we want to, we're going to choose to select type event is equal to note, and we'll say position and we'll say is inside bar range, and we'll just put roughly around 2, and then we'll say or position is inside bar range roughly around beat 4, and we can be more precise about that, but let's say we have this. So I'm going to apply the quantize, so I want this to be or. So now we could select notes that are on beats 2 and 4, and if we wanted to now do our quantizing on that, we can say, okay, I want this to be 16th notes with a high swing percentage. So usually, like, the swing is not necessarily on beats 2 and 4, but you could do stuff like that if you needed to. But generally the swing is going to be between the beats. So, but if you wanted to select all of the notes on beats 2 and 4 and do quantizing on that, like if you could do that, but like swings are often, it's what's kind of in between and not necessarily on a beat as we see graphically here. So if I just say, okay, we quantize, we may not notice a big change, but that's how you would do it. So you could select the values here. So you go to select, select notes, and we'll say position is inside the bar range and just kind of roughly draw around beats 2. And we want to set the Boolean condition here to or, so around beat 2 or beat 4. And then you could then quantize the selected notes. But if we wanted to, take our notes here, let's say, and let's go to our quantize panel, and we quantize, we could see that it's usually the notes before beats 2 and 4 that are the ones that kind of make up the feel of a swing. Cast Germania says he grew up recording on tape. When I first saw Cubase, I almost couldn't believe it. So yeah, I remember having to do vocal tuning using Akai samplers at $400 an hour. Yeah. All right, so we see Soren from Sweden checking in. Glad you could make it today. All right, so we see Michael Teams. I saw that there's a lot of very rough weather, so we're glad that you survived it. And he just has blurry internet, so better blurry internet and have a roof than not. So, but glad you're okay. All right, so we have music for World Peace Records, checking in from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Many fond memories of driving through Pine Grove, seeing relatives. So we see question, is the latest version of VST Connect compatible with Cubase 11? So yes, yeah, so definitely is. All right, so we see from Music for World Peace Records, which Taylor, can you demonstrate some of the new features in Howling in Sonic 7? So one, it's going to be If you're on Mac OS, it's going to be M1 native. It doesn't require e-licenser anymore, so it's on Steinberg licensing. So when we go to, let me just make sure. So when we go to Halion Sonic, so it's going to be very similar to what we had. So new browser, and when we go to like our rating system, the rating system that we do in Media Bay is automatically synchronized with the rating system that we have here. So let's say if we want to go to, so let's say we just open up a number of different files. So, this is a little easier to kind of navigate all your different presets. I think one of the things that's interesting is, let's say if we go to MIDI, let me see if I could find the particular. That now we could also come over and have, I think that there's the flex phraser that's part of it. So this is a big thing that was in Halion Sonic and not in Halion Sonic SE. So let's say this is like a really slick arpeggiator. So if we say, okay, I just want to take so I'm just going to play one chord and so, but this could also go into, okay, I want to go into synth sequencings of different arpeggios. And you can say, okay, I want this to be so being able to kind of work with a lot more additional capabilities for the flex phraser, which is a feature every time I would show it in Halion Sonic. People were like, oh, I want that in Halion Sonic SE, but if we wanted to just say, okay, let's go to strings, and let me just open up a quick generic string patch here. So just being able to say, okay, I want to just kind of even just navigate and different presets to be able to just say, okay, as we want to be able to kind of search for all of our different patches. So we'll say, okay, I want just strings. So let's say I'll just find kind of more of a generic cinematic string patch. So again, we go to edit, come over here to programs, select the flex phraser, activate it. And at this point, we'll say, and you could have even kind of user presets if you wanted to. So, but as soon as we come over here, just say, okay, I want to go to different arpeggios. So this is like a really cool thing to explore inside. So those are some of the major new things, but again, it's kind of a whole new engine. You could play like the new instruments like Colors, FM Lab that will take advantage of all the new capabilities inside of Halion Sonic. So it's a nice, and again, it's a free upgrade for everyone, and all your Halion Sonic SE3 projects will immediately just kind of work. So we see Jazz Dude just saying, I went Zappa. So I just watched an interview with Frank this morning. So, and been long known Dweezil for 20 years. He's a big Steinberg user. Okay, so we see from Jeweler to Rocket, feature request. Is it possible to add fader control on the tracks where we see the signal in the project, similar to F2 master fader control, and the same thing to pre and post signal? It would be awesome. So I'm not sure if you wanted to see like the fader like here on this particular track. So I know it's kind of a feature request that I passed on before, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding. But yeah, I think it'd be cool to see just kind of a quick fader right here, and maybe a pan pot would be kind of cool. But let me know if that's what you want. I know I've suggested it, but coming from users generally has more impact coming from users and then for me. All right, so we see question, is Cubase better for anyone on a touchscreen? Seems like it would be faster. So I think a lot of times if you have your, like, any basic control surface that's dialed in, like, I could do incredibly fast stuff with, a one fader box or a simple, like my Korg Nano control, which I use. But if it's kind of set up for you, you could use like basic controls, I think, and have it work very fast. And also knowing keyboard shortcuts will be very fast. But a lot of people use different touch screens to fire off macros and, different, keyboard shortcuts, like Hans Zimmer probably started the whole thing. And it's just because I remember one time I was at his studio and he's just like, oh, you can remember all the keyboard shortcuts. And he's like, I'm so jealous. I was like, I have to have a touchscreen because I can't remember the keyboard shortcuts. It's like that part of his brain doesn't work anymore or something, he was telling me. So, but if you could memorize the keyboard shortcuts, you could do quite a bit with your computer keyboard as well as with a modest control surface, I think. I think a lot of touchscreens, if you use a lot, like I have guys like, man, my arm hurts. Why is that? It's because you're using a touchscreen and you're reaching out constantly at a weird angle. So, but there's obviously people that use touchscreens and love them. All right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer checking in from Beulahville, North Carolina. It's great to see you on the Zoom meetup on Tuesday. He's already got free ice cream from Michael Teams, so generous. All right, so we have a question from Dr. Faze from Quebec, Canada. It says, my question, is there any way to use an audio track to trigger an instrument track? So there's we could do it for kind of monophonic sources. So if you're doing something like, let's say two different examples I can show you. So it's not going to automatically take something that has chords and have that trigger a MIDI track. So it's not going to take like, a piano that's playing chords or guitar part that's, polyphonic and be able to do that. But if you wanted to take like drums, let's say if I want to do like drum replacement, we could go to our hit point tab here and we could turn these hit points. We'll see this little create tab and we could turn these into MIDI notes so that when we double click on our sample editor, we can say, okay, let's make MIDI notes. I want to put them at a particular velocity level. So now we could replace our kick drum with different samples. If we wanted to do it for audio that wasn't polyphonic, like a bass or a vocal, we could come over to Very Audio. And then from the Very Audio tab, we could extract MIDI and put it onto its own track as well, so that now we could have like a kick track and we could look at our bass line, if we want to see that as in our MIDI key editor, we could turn that into MIDI and have that play back through different instrument tracks. All right, Michael Teams wants people to smash the like button and keep me gainfully employed in these great live streams helping so many of us. All right, so we see, is it possible to sync Halion 7 to external MIDI clock? I'd like to use it with my arranger keyboard. So I don't think Halion 7 doesn't have its own sequencer. So since it doesn't have its own sequencer, it's not going to necessarily sync to MIDI clock. And generally if you want any, so, you could do synchronization okay for MIDI stuff, but if you're dealing with any audio, MIDI clock isn't going to be precise enough to properly synchronize audio. But I'm not sure if you want to do Halion 7 as a standalone instrument or inside of Cubase. So generally Cubase won't. You could have Cubase send MIDI clock out and be the master to your arranger keyboard, but generally MIDI clock isn't a really precise way. You can't properly synchronize audio that way. Okay, so we have a question from Patrick. I wanted to ask, I saw a scaler plugin, if I could create chord rollovers, hard hits, ARP swings. Does Cubase have something related to this? Do I need to spend some money on plugs? It's costly though. So, you could use, let me just go over here. So I'll just paint in some chords here real quick. Sorry, didn't like that. So there is kind of a scale assistant that you could use in the MIDI editor. I'll just open up a quick project here. So I don't think you'd have to buy anything, third-party tools for this. Okay, so let's say I'll move this track up. We'll put it underneath the chord track. All right, so let's say I have this particular part here. And once we're in the MIDI editor, we have a scale assistant. So we can say I want to use the editor scale, which can be defined, or I want to use the chord track. So once we have this, I could just say I want to take all these notes here. And I could, once we're in our scale assistant, I could say quantize pitches, and all the pitches will automatically follow the chord track right there. So you could just do it directly with the scale assistant. So we'll save you a bunch of money, and you could just use the features that you already have in Cubase. All right, so you see from Drowsy Eternal, I guess I'm misinterpreting him, but if you want to send a picture of what you want to do in Hallion 6 with the macros, just send a screenshot. You could email to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right, wonderful to see David M. on from Liverpool. All right, so we see from Hala Sounds, as a Reason 12 user, can you tell me how Cubase is better? I know you have a video player that works with QuickTime. Can you show me that? So yeah, I mean, I think you would find Cubase is kind of the most comprehensive program for any type of tasks that you want. But if you want to just, if you're doing kind of different video stuff, so let's say, and a lot of people will be writing for picture. It's pretty common. So you could have your video track directly inside of Cubase. You can do some rough edits. So you can do some like very rudimentary, cut, copy, paste. If you hit F8, that will open up the video window. So as, we want to just navigate, we're able to just kind of come over and let's see. And one of the cool things is the ability to say, okay, I want, so we could, have your video in, we could, have time code automatically overlaid on a video so you could see exactly in the video window. But one of the cool things is if you go to use video follows edit mode, that as you move any particular element here, so as I move a note, if I want it to be exactly synced, and this is actually the Steinberg office in Hamburg, that you could just simply say, okay, I want this note to start right where the globe is. So I could just come over here. See, they're playing foosball. All right, so I want this note to go right there. So we could just kind of move any element, and at that point, just have the video update. But as we move an audio event, as we move MIDI notes, we could also have different notes that will be locked, because each track could be based in linear or musical mode. So if I wanted a note to happen directly like where this cloud comes in, I could I could have a track and just have that particular cymbal sound. So let's say if I want to put a cymbal sound, let me just rewind a little bit here. So let's say I just want to put, let me see if I can find, all right, so now if I wanted to put this particular, this sound to happen, so I just want to record that note. All right, so let's say, let me just get that. I'm just going to watch it here quickly. Okay, so now we're just going to record. So let's say that note was a little bit later than I wanted. I could now move this particular note and say, okay, that note was a little late. So I can move the note and hear it. Let's say maybe the cymbal sound. Now I could place this particular track into linear mode, and I could change the tempo of my project. So let's say if I change my tempo, and generally if I change the tempo and slow everything down or speed everything up, all the tracks are now playing slow. But since this is in linear mode, that event kind of stays locked in time to where that cloud comes in. So if I speed my tempo up to, let's say, 140 beats a minute, and we play, that cymbal sound will still say locked. In the same exact position. So Cubase allows you to do stuff like that. But there's all sorts of, wonderful things. And if you're a Reason user, you just kind of could run it as a VST plugin inside of Cubase 12. And that should give you an indication of probably where, that company is headed. That instead of being a platform, they chose to be a plugin. So, and welcome to the Club Cubase live stream. All right, so we have a question. Is dithering used only when downgrading the bit rate to a CD quality? Realize that anytime that we're doing processing, anytime that the audio signal is altered in any way, adjusting, 1/1000th of a dB up, it's being run through the audio engine. Everything is at 32-bit floating point. So you could use dithering not only for, going to CD, but, considering that if you're delivering something, all the processing in Cubase could be 32-bit floating point or 64-bit floating point precision for processing. And we could, create 64-bit and 32-bit floating point files that if you're delivering a 24-bit resolution file, which is pretty typical, then you could use dithering in that. So it's not limited to just being for, like getting down to 16-bit 44.1 for CDs. All right, so we have a question. Is it possible to have MIDI note repeat and use a MIDI controller to control the repeat timing? All right, so within the full version of Groove Agent, it has a note repeat functionality. But if you wanted to let me just go to this project here. All right, I'll activate this project. All right, so one of the things that you could do is, let's say I just have my snare here, and let's say I'll just kind of, hit the snare, and there's a MIDI insert plugin, and we'll call this our MIDI Echo. So as we come over to our MIDI Echo plugin, And I'm going to choose to not affect the pitch here. So at this point, we could just say, okay, I want this to be, 30-second notes. And we could kind of set this particular all right, now, so we could set kind of our value here. And I think that if we want to control, so I just hit the note once, but if we wanted this to actually be controlled, I'm going to just say, okay, we have a quick control here, and I want to set the value of the quick control. So let's say I want to go to the MIDI channel. I think if we come here and we'll say our inserts to MIDI echo, and we will choose our so let me just look at the parameter again from my MIDI insert here. Just make sure I have the right name. All right, so I'm just going to even come over here to quick controls, and let me just go to my MIDI modifiers here. Okay, and I'm going to keep that on top. Let's get to the quick controls, and I'm going to click on Learn, and I'm just going to move my delay time here. All right, so now I could just move this particular fader. Let me just take it off. Let me just learn that. So once it's learned, now I could just so at this point I can say, okay. So you could change the value using your MIDI CC. Now, if you have a full license of Groove Agent, you could come over, and this is not the Groove Agent SE that comes with Cubase, but the full Groove Agent that's sold separately or that's sold, in absolute. You could come directly over here, and there's a whole note repeat section as part of the instrument. But check out the MIDI Echo MIDI insert plugin, and then you could do note repeat stuff there and change the values using quick controls. All right, so we have Roby M. Becky, just wishing everyone greetings and good luck with their future projects. That's very nice. All right, so we see Rolex Flows, says he lives 40 minutes away from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. So yeah, my dad grew up in St. Clair, and my aunt and cousins grew up in Schuylkill Haven. So we used to always drive through Pine Grove. I remember going for the Halloween parade as a kid, and we used to always drive through there to get on 81 to head back home to DC area. So many fond memories. All right, so we see from PETA, when going through the process from mix to WAV file, then open it to mastered, I noticed that my final file is lower in volume compared to other music. What's the correct way to increase the volume? So there's a number of ways of doing it. One is, it's kind of the elusive art of mixing to get kind of the similar levels, and people are always trying to get, whatever level that they're at, they always want their mix to be louder. With a lot of people, one thing that can always affect this is, what I see is many times people will take their master fader and kind of use this as a volume control, and realize that if, we have all of our faders high and we have our master fader down, like kind of the stereo out bus, that, if we have this down 12 dB, we're dropping the volume on the exported audio file down by 12 dB. So if we try to keep their master fader around 0 dB and adjust the gain structure based on that, then that's not going to hurt you in any way. So that could help often if you have your master fader down, and if you do that because you have powered speakers with amplifiers, very typical. Here we could use the control room, which is just your monitoring volume, but doesn't affect the gain structure of the mixer. Once your file is mixed down, you could do some other processing. So you could take a mixed file, and if you wanted, if you want to run it through different mastering processes like limiters, multiband compressors, and you have a full channel strip of different compressors, limiters that could be used on the file. You could also just take a stereo mix down file, select it, and if you know kind of what the target loudness that you're seeking, so a lot of times with streaming services, it may be like minus 14 LUFS. But at this point, you could go to, if you have an audio file selected, we could, take your mix down file and go to audio, to processes. And then at this point, you could say, I want to normalize. And then you could normalize to minus 14 LUFS or a particular level here. So, and you could take a particular file and, take a reference audio file if you wanted to. If you have it on CD, you could import it as an audio file, import directly from an audio CD and do an analysis. So if you go to select a file and go to statistics, this will tell you kind of what the overall loudness is of your particular file, of that particular file, and then you could match the amounts. But sometimes it's the elusive art of mixing, how different channels are combined, that some will just sound louder than others. But those are some things you could do. And people use programs like Wavelab for mastering to really kind of get the levels up. And, some people would think that the actual, a lot of people equate mastering with making it louder. And most of my mastering engineer friends would, kind of scoff at that. It's like, it's the worst thing you could do, But there are ways of, different limiters, and the tools you have inside of Cubase, where the brick wall limiter, Smasher are great tools to kind of get levels up on your files. All right, wonderful to see Tiago checking in from Brazil. All right, so we have a question from Windy Shore 74. Greg, thanks so much for doing these. Is there a way to align multiple events that are in different positions on the timeline to the cursor so that they all start at the cursor? Okay. Okay, so let's say I want to take this file. I'll unmute these so we can see them. All right, so I want to take all these files here, and let's say my cursor is here. So I think that there is a move. Let's see if it works for multiple events. So we go to edit to move, and I think we can move event starts to cursor. Looks like it moves. them all relative. Okay, so let me see. Let's see if we could do it in the project. So we could kind of, take that particular function, and on individual files, it looks like, let me try with the transport follows edit mode. I'll try this one more time, see if that makes any difference. So we'll get edit, move event starts to cursor. So that's going to do kind of one at a time, I think. Let's see if this will do two if they're at the same time. So if they're all starting at the same time, let me just see if. Okay, but it's going to kind of keep the proportionality. Let's see if maybe we could do it with the project logical editor. Not sure if we can, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, so let's see if this. Yep, so this looks like it works. So come here, let's select like these 4 events. So my cursor is here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 events. So I just said take selected events and position move to cursor and hit apply. And then all the events will be lined up. So I'll save that as a preset. So once again, container type is equal to event. The property is, I just did selected. And then we want to choose transform for the action. Let's position, let's move to cursor. So we could just do it like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And you could save that, once you save it as a preset, you could trigger it with a particular keyboard shortcut or from the MIDI Remote editor. Okay. Wonderful to see Gareth on live stream. Thanks for joining us. And great to see Nick as well. And thank you, Nick, for your video you sent about live stream. Appreciate it. All right. All right, and we see that Michael Teen's project, the Cartoon Character Assassins, has their release coming out tomorrow. So congratulations on getting the project done. All right, and then we see, is it Malin is like number 70. Let me clear my throat real quick. Thank you for hitting the like button. All right. All right, so we see a question from Valley. How to turn off velocity sensitivity on the sampler track? Okay, so let's come here to my sampler track. Okay, so I don't think we may have to just do it. Don't know if there's a way to do it in the sampler track, but we could do it on. So let's say as we play. All right, so I'm not sure if there's a way to just. So we could fix the pitch. But I think if we just go to like your input transformer, at this point we could just say, let's go to the track. And you could go to open panel and just say, okay, at this point, and there may be even a preset for this. Okay, I'll just make one. So we'll say insert, we'll say note, and then we'll say value 2, set to fixed value, and let's say we want this to be 120. So if I hit it very hard, or very softly, doesn't matter. So you could just use the input transformer right here and just set it to lock. You can say we want it to transform. We're going to say type is equal to note. Value 2, which of a MIDI note message is velocity, set to fixed value, and put it to 120. And you could have that saved within the track or globally within a particular project. All right, we see David M. is happy with his tuxedo cream ice cream from Michael Teams. So we see a question. Hi, Greg. Using Logical Editor, is it possible to have instrument channels grouped into one channel and use the solo mute button on that channel to switch on and off solo mute on all group channels? So if they're selected as well, so let's say if these are selected and I hit solo or S or M, the selected channels can do that by default just by hitting solo, S for solo, or M for mute. If we wanted to put these into a folder, so let's say, okay, I want to move selected tracks to the new folder, I could also just solo. So let's say if we're here, let's go ahead and keep the, so I think, let me just clear all the mute states. So now I could solo the folder if you wanted to treat it as a folder, or if we wanted to right click and add these to a group channel, we could solo the group channel and have the different elements that are routed to the group channel soloed. So you could do it by channels being selected. So hit S and M for solo and mute. If they're in a folder track, you could do it by soloing and muting the folder track or the group channel, or a combination of those three methods. We see Jazz Dudes posted a link for the Steinberg promotion, so if you haven't jumped up to latest version, or you want your friends to get into it so they could be running better software, it's a wonderful time. 40% off. See, Anders says he spent way too much time scrubbing and zooming with the mouse in Cubase. When I learned what Shift and Control did, I was blown away. So, all right, Gareth has spilled my secret and says that, and revealed I do get a tickle every time that someone smashes the like button. So, and I'll really laugh if you do a video saying how much, if the Club Cubase live stream, what you get out of it. That would be wonderful too. And you can share that to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. All right, so I just see from Nikolay Svetkov, the flex razors will not synchronize, and also drum player and others. So it's good. Just take a look. Pretty sure that the flex razor will sync. So I'll do a new project here, and we'll throw in some. All right, so let's do tempo track here. Okay, so we have some tempo changes here. Okay, so let's add an instrument track. All right, so okay, so we'll come over here to edit, and let's go to our flex phraser. Okay, and let's come to like a string arpeggio. And let's just set this for eighth notes. Okay, and now we will just play. So it seems like that's synchronizing. So it seems like the flex phraser is definitely syncing to the project. So let me know if it does something differently for you. And if we opened up Groove Agent, you say also the drum player doesn't synchronize. Let's just open up a quick Groove Agent pattern here. So we'll see if it speeds up. So it looks like that syncs up as well. So if I want to do both of them and play. So it looks like that all works as expected. All right, my chat field just jumped. Let me see. Okay, so I think I'm close to where I was. All right. So we see Uno Mementos saying greetings from Lapland. He saw a very nice Aurora Borealis on Monday. So that's one of my bucket list items, just to see one. Always so fascinated by them. All right. All right, so we see from Drowsy Eternal, just says, I love the scale chord track thing. Always create the best melodies in chord when they are in scale. See, Peter checked in from IKEA a little earlier, so I'm glad you can make it and you're back in your control room. All right, so we have a question from Jeweler to Rocket. Can we select the automation shape, sine, square, wave, etc., or random shapes when trying to automate a track? Am I missing something? Does it exist yet? So yeah, it exists. So let me just quick add an audio track here. So you have a dedicated drawing tool. So you may see a line tool. So if we wanted to see, a square wave, we could just, again, come right here and draw in square waves. If you want to change the frequency of it, you could hold down the shift key if you want to. So if we want to do that, or if you want it to be sine wave, and again, so if you want that to be synced to the grid, you could do stuff like that. So again, just go to your drawing tool and you could select different shapes just like so. So if you want it to be inverted, change the frequency of it, that'd be all you'd have to do. So we'll give you that feature free, and you could start off March doing all sorts of creative automation tasks. All right, reading through comments. So thanks for all the great questions and great discussion. See, Gareth is going out to feed his daughter, so. Hope you and Lola have a good dinner. All right, wonderful to see Trond from Norway joining. All right, so we see from Jose Antonio Gazzo, question, when I make new versions on different tracks, they all get different IDs. So when I want to change them back at once, I get a prompt saying I can't. How can I change all the versions at once? All right, so let's go just create a scenario here. Let's add a couple more audio tracks. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick recording. All right, and I'm just going to do punch out. So let's say, okay, so I'm here. Okay, and let's say on this one, I didn't have this track armed. So I want to select all these. Let's do new track version, but I'm not going to record on audio track 1. Okay, and let's say for this new version, so even if you don't have anything like recorded, so let's say now that they're all selected, let's do a new version here. Okay, so while we're doing this, if I wanted to go to, version 1, to version 2, version 3. So even though we didn't record anything, just because it was selected when we made the new version, we're able to do that. But I think, let's say if we have this all in version 1, and let's go to, so let's say if I come here, we could, so even if you didn't necessarily record, you could just say, select tracks with the same ID. So at this point, when we come here, we could now say, okay, this is on version 2, this is on version 3. So if we come here and we say select tracks with the same version ID, now we could just go back and forth between the different tracks. So it could be that maybe you just have the track recorded as you're doing new track versions. Okay. And then I think if we wanted to perhaps change, so if we wanted to rename the particular versions, that you could, name those. So maybe as you're doing it, have the different tracks selected so that all of the versions will be in sync. All right. So you see Michael Team's got a howdy from Lola, Gareth's daughter. So you have to tell us what you made for dinner, Gareth, now that you stepped away and told everyone you were stepping away for dinner. Okay, so we see from Jose Antonio Gazzo, I like how the default FX channel folder created by Cubase is very small in height and it can't be changed. Is there a way I can make other folders this way? So let's say I'm going to add an FX channel track and I'll put it inside folder. All right, so all right, so sorry, let me just turn the lanes off here. So I don't know of a way to take the other folders. Let's say if I take these particular tracks and put them to folder. Let me see if so I don't know if there's a way to fix the folder height. And it could be maybe the contents here. Maybe because it doesn't need additional content for, we just try adding a couple of folder tracks or a couple effects tracks. I'll create them outside the folder. Okay, and let's say if we put these into so I don't know of a way to have that kind of fixed to do it, but it may be just kind of a default setting. So, but I don't know a way to restrict folders, but you could obviously resize the folders to be smaller, or if you have those set up in a template. But I think if we didn't have the ability to expand them, that people would be more upset about that. All right, wonderful to see David Reuter and Kristen Parisi from Big Tent. Glad you guys can make it. Hope you're both doing well. Enjoy seeing all your pictures of rainbow trout that you're posting, David, on Facebook. All right, so we see a question. What is the best way to detune a drums track 3 decibels lower and retain the highest quality possible? So I'm not sure if it's 3 decibels or 3 cents, 3 semitones. But really all you'd have to do, I'll just jump to this project here. All right, so I'll just take all my drum tracks here and just make them louder. So I'll put them into a group quickly. All right, so let's say we hear our drums well. All right. So if you want to just take your overhead tracks and detune them, so I'm going to select my overhead left and right, and I'll just transpose the tracks down 3. So let's just say, okay, we want to do 3 semitones. Then if we choose back to 0, so really all you'd have to do is, if you wanted to transpose the drums down, is just simply come and just select transpose there. So I think that has shown up in someone's like secret tip or something. Gotten asked it a couple times. But that's really all you'd have to do. All right, so we have a question. How to get rid of artifacts with spectral layers. So, you could come over, let me just, I think I may have a project show some of this. So I'm not sure if you're trying to remove artifacts that are in a recording but we'll start there. All right, so let's say, like if we have something like, this is just my voice. Let's record it. Let me just. You may blow into the microphone accidentally. So let's say maybe you have a recording where you may blow into the mic. Where if you go to a particular, just I'll just do it on a new project here, import files. And see, I may have kind of a quick. Okay, so let's say we have something. You may blow into the microphone accidentally. And let's say if we look at this, we may have just a little bit of like someone like into the microphone accidentally. Where we have that kind of nasty bump of a breath, kind of a plosive. So if we wanted to be able to take care of this, we could just go to, and once we're in spectral layers, let's say, so we're going to just kind of zoom in. On those particular frequencies. So we can see that this is where kind of the breath is. So if we wanted to just kind of be able to navigate, I will say let's just do kind of more of an elliptical selection. So I'm going to select this and I'll just hit kind of like delete a couple times. And now as we play back the file, we could just kind of do those particular types of frequency dependent editing and not editing on every single file. So we could just kind of take out those particular things. And that's what we could do with spectral layers. And you could do like guitar squeaks and stuff like that. All right, so we have a question. Do we have a stock hand clapper on Cubase? So I'm sure that many of the drum kits inside of Groove Agent SE will automatically follow. So at this point, let's just say let's go to this project, and I'm sure if you're looking for hand claps, there's lots of different hand claps with different Groove Agent kits. So if we want to, let me just turn off my MIDI echo here. So that, and this is just in like the Urban Ballads kit, but pretty much every drum kit inside of Groove Agent SE that's not like an acoustic agent kit would have this automatically have hand claps as part of it. Okay, so we have Mr. Evil B666 from Bjorn from Germany. He's mostly a silent watcher, so thanks for joining us. All right, so we have a question. The listen tool is not working. I'm currently talking about the tool, not the listen button, only available in Pro. When I click events, I don't hear anything. Is there any way to fix it? All right, so let me just come to this file here. Let me revert. All right, so this may have to be routed through the control room. So let's say if I just want to grab the so if you let's see if we have this set up. Let's get to my audio connection. So I just have the control room activated. So if I come, and let's say we go to the outputs here, and we have that set up. You don't hear it, but activate the control room. Then it should work for you, Jose. Okay. All right, reading through. All right, so you see Dashbag says that his Hallion Sonic SE was causing Cubase to crash. So a lot of times people don't update their Hallion Sonic SE version as well. So you always have to make sure that you're the latest version of that it's the same version of the plugin that you have. That's really that it's kind of in sync. So, but I haven't had problems with Hallion Sonic SE crashing. Okay, so we have Mike Rivera ask, hello, Greg. Question. When working on a piano track, how would I add a take and continue adding on the same track while performing it live? I've noticed that it will save all MIDI, even the note I don't want. Okay, so let's say if we have like a Rhodes part here. All right, so I'll do my awful piano playing. Okay, so if I want it to, one of the things you can do is just do, and let me just take off my punch out. So if I want to do just a new version, sorry, let me just delete those. So you could always just do and say, okay, now at this point, just add a quick. So And if I want this to be, go to version 1. So you could always just do new track versions. Let me just make sure. We'll save all the MIDI even. So, let me know if just, doing new track versions would help you with that. See, Gerald Ely says he's had Howling and Sonic SE for 3 years, never caused a crash. It's always been third-party plugins. All right, Valley has a question. Does HMT Hermo tuning have any effect on mixing, or is it just on instruments? So it's only going to be on instruments, and that's why you only see it really for MIDI events. And that just allows you to have different temperament scales, like tuning temperaments. So it doesn't really have any effect on actual on audio for mixing. So. Okay, reading through comments. All right. All right, wonderful to see Tim Weinheimer on the live stream. Glad you can make it. Then my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from the Studio International. Hi, Greg. Could you show how you would save a new instrument sound in Halion 7, colors free, and how to find the path to where it is? Save Cubase Pro 12, Windows 11. So, all right, so let's open it up. All right, so let me just add. Okay, so let's say. Okay, so now I will come over here. And let's. Oh, sorry. All right, and so let's come over here. So let me just check. All right, so let's come over to, so now we saved it as Studio International. I think we could come over. So usually you go to User Presets, to VST Instruments. And then like you can see our preset that we saved here earlier. So, but generally you just come over and then you would see it, may have to refresh it, but it would just show up. Kind of right there. So let's say if we now wanted to go to user presets and not factory, we could just see Studio International. So as soon as we go into Halion 7, we'll go ahead and hit OK. And at this point, you could just say, okay, I want to not see factory. I want to see user sounds. And then, but you'll see that they'll just kind of show up directly there. So that's all you'd have to do. Just save it, and then it'll show up under the user sets. All right, so we see from Jay Hatchie, I have a problem when zoomed all the way in on audio events. Some are overlapping or too long. I have to turn off snap in zero crossing to use my scissors tool to try to correct it by cutting. The excess parts to turn snap zero to move the file in place. Okay. Okay, so let me see if I can, so let's say if we slightly move this over, I'm going to turn off my snap. All right, so I'm going to make sure we have snap to zero. Let's say we're zoomed all the way in here, and I just wanted to cut. All right, so zoomed all the way in audio events, and some are overlapping, so let me go ahead and copy this. This closer, so as okay, so let's say we're here, and all right, so I'm going to turn off my snap, and let's say turn this off. Okay, so all right, so let's say zoomed all the way, and some are overlapping or too long. I have to turn them off. Snap zero crossing. Use my scissors tool to try and correct by cutting. The excess parts turn snap and zero back on more than the file place. So if these are kind of like overlapping for you, one of the things that you might want to do, is to see if you. So if you go to preferences and you choose to delete overlaps, so go to editing and then delete overlaps, then as you move over the two events, let me make sure I have that activated. So like as you come over, then it will just delete for you. So maybe instead of having to snap and cut if it's overlapping, just do a delete overlaps. So let me move this to where we have more signal, make it a little more obvious visually. So now as I drag this over, it's just going to delete that, and you can still roll it back. So maybe instead of cutting to get rid of excess, just activate delete overlaps preference from the editing. All right. All right, so we see from got your, I've been getting this weird explosion of noise at the, I guess, beginning of recordings I rendered at Audio Mixdown, started about 2 weeks ago. Any idea what this could be? Doesn't happen all the time. So, it could be maybe a plugin. You might be able to trace it down to a particular plugin that could cause that. So the only time I've heard of stuff like that happening on like kind of an export or rendered is when a plugin was misbehaving. So see if you could isolate it to a particular third-party plugin. If you have third-party plugins in your session, and it'll probably be related to that. See, the Heartbreak Time Machine says, raise your hand if you've been in audio production for over a decade and still have no idea what you're doing. I think everyone just fakes it. So, all right. So we got a question from John Barry. Greg, Download Manager now has a red dot next to the Update tab, and VST Sounds is in the list. Does this need updating? So let me just take a look. So I'm not sure what VST Sounds it is, but probably, it probably is an indication that it would need updating. So let's say if we go to the Download Assistant. So let's say if we go to Cubase 12, so I would think that if you probably see red signs here, it could be indicating that there is an update available. But if you want to send me a screenshot just to be sure, because I don't have any on mine, but I probably keep mine updated pretty regularly. But if you want to send a screenshot and email it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a look at it. All right. So we see when MIDI files, so this is from Jay Hatchie, when MIDI files have controller data embedded, I feel it's a pain to delete all the data entries, especially right at the bottom of the controller lane when using the erase tool to delete the automation dots. All right. So if you have like a lot, of different MIDI events, I think that you could even come over to, to import. Let's say if we go to your preferences, and let's go to MIDI file, and let's see if there's a way to, on import options, to all right. So one of the things you can do is just simply, if you want to get rid of all of your MIDI CCs from a MIDI file, and you don't want to manually delete it, is, use a logical editor. So let's say at this point you want to delete MIDI CCs. You want to delete every MIDI CC. You could say, okay, we want to delete, type is equal to controller, and type is equal to maybe program change. That's something that people often will delete. So instead of manually going through, you could say delete every controller and every program change, and save that as a logical editor preset. And I'm sure there's probably a preset in there already that does that. Yeah, so delete program changes in bank select. So you could just do it from the logical editor as well. And another thing you could do if you have like a lot of MIDI CCs, this is a good use of the, so let's say we have a lot of modulation data. If you look in the list editor, you could see kind of all of your modulation data. So you could select one controller and then say go to focus and say go to event types, select all, delete, and all of your MIDI CC all your MIDI CC1 will be gone as well. So again, to do that, go to your MIDI list editor, select one of the events, go to focus. Say you want to go to the event type, select all, control, command, plus letter A, delete, and then they could all be gone in just a matter of a couple seconds. All right, so we see a question. Is there a way to refresh Cubase to update a hardware instrument that has just been plugged in without having to restart the program like you can with VSTI? So if it is just with, so I'm not sure how the hardware instrument is connected. So if it's MIDI that is connected, it will automatically see that the MIDI communication is is addressable through USB, but it's not going to automatically update the external instrument definition in the. It's not going to necessarily update the connection information, but it shouldn't change if the instrument is connected and you have the same audio inputs and outputs in that selected. You shouldn't really have to change. Let's see, Nick is a great quote. Just says 30 plus years of using Cubase. I'm still learning. I am too. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's good job security. Okay, so we have Flacker for Franz, or Flacker Franz asks, hello guys, and thank you, Greg. When I want to send MIDI notes from Cubase to my hardware drum machine, it only works with normal keyboard map and not with the drum map. Any workarounds possible? So it could be that when you have a MIDI track, depending on, so it should work here, but if you go to a particular, let's say if we open up a drum map for this particular event, a lot of people go to the GM map. And if you do that, when we go to the general MIDI map, it could be, because it is general MIDI, that if you slide over the dividing line, that it's set to MIDI channel 10. So maybe you could change all these to MIDI channel, whatever your MIDI drum machine is on, or change your drum machine to respond to MIDI channel 10 and see if that works. But if you're using kind of the GM map, it's probably going to, have the drums automatically go to MIDI channel 10, because that's what the Roland MT32 did back in 1988. So try to make sure that your MIDI channel matches the drum map. All right, so we see, is it possible to drag a piece of cut audio from an audio track straight to a new track? Doesn't work for me. So I don't think we could do it like straight from like the timeline. So, that doesn't work. But if you have the audio, let's say in, because it just needs like a home for it to go to. So if there is, but if we take an audio file from here, we could drag it, into the project window and create tracks just like that from outside of the project window, but not necessarily, but once I have an audio track, I could do that. But otherwise, it's kind of doesn't have a place to drag it to. So, if I drag it to my track list, it's not going to work. It just needs a home to be able to go into. So it needs, the square hole for this, the square cutout for the square to go into. You see, Nick has helpful hints and hand claps on his CV, so that's clever. All right, my chat field just jumped. All right, so I think I'm back where I was. Thank you for all wonderful questions. Slowly catching up. All right, so we see from Mad Felder, very nice this is. I need to gather some questions maybe for the next one, but till then, hopefully able to learn something from the other questions also. Yeah, so I think that's one of the great things about this format is many people learn from other people's questions or just haven't gotten there yet and can be inspired. All right, so we see I have Cubase Artist 10 using PC. My mastering project has a lot of reverb in it. How do I get rid of it? So if your mix has a lot of reverb in it and you're mastering that, there are some tools like, spectral layers to kind of do de-reverbing. But, that could be really like, if someone had recorded in a very ambient room with lots of, with a room with lots of reflections where you could isolate kind of the original recording, but it's not necessarily to take reverb off of a full mix. So, the best way to do that, if at all possible, is to get the multi-tracks. But let me know if it's just like a mix file that you want, or if it's your project file, like the mastering template that has a lot of reverb, because it shouldn't, or if it's a project, like an audio file that you got that has a lot of reverb. If you could clarify that, that would be wonderful. Great to see Jeff Zabelski from Chico, California. We see a Heartbreak Time Machine is saying hello from Sacramento. All right, so we have a question from Bruce. What are the differences between bounce, duplicate track, and render in place, and when are they best used? Okay, so if I wanted to duplicate a track, let's say I have edits here in this particular track, and maybe I wanted to do some experimenting, so I right-click, and I duplicate the track, so it's basically playing back the same different files here. So, and this could be useful if, I had a background vocal and I wanted to pan one all the way to the left and this one all the way to the right. So that's a good use of duplication. Now, when we do a bounce selection, this would take kind of all of our different files that we have here and could consolidate them into one contiguous part. So this is going to create a new file, and we could choose to have that new file overwrite or kind of replace the actual files in our timeline. So if I come here, we'll do a project, and we'll do a bounce selection. We go to audio, and we go to bounce selection, we will choose to replace. And now I have one file that's newly created. So if you have like a whole slew of different edits that you painstakingly done, just come over and you could just do a bounce selection, and then one of the files isn't going to, like if you come here before and you're like, okay, I had just, like a whole slew of little tiny edits, and I come here and one of these edits, all of a sudden got shifted accidentally. If it was set up into kind of instead of worrying about multiple little audio files, the bounce selection can kind of consolidate these particular files so that this would all just show up and we can replace them in the timeline. And now we have one event. The original files are still in the pool and available to use. But at that point, we could just handle that and now have one part for that. When we want to use render in place, we could think of it as like doing a bounce selection, but it's going to incorporate, and the render in place also works, ideally well for virtual instruments, where we want to take a MIDI part that's being routed to a virtual instrument, and then it is creating an audio file, perhaps to free up system resources. But the other thing that render in place does is when we go to our render in place is we have different levels of included processing. So I could have it dry. If I have multiple events selected, I could do them as one event or separate events. We could include like the inserts, EQ, and channel strip if I wanted to have any of the effects like sends, such as reverbs or delays, or my master effects if I wanted to include all those processing in the audio files. At that point, we could include all of the automation, the mixing, the effects in a render in place, whereas a bounce selection is just going to be kind of consolidating the audio files. So those are some of the differences. So think of duplicating as maybe doubling, and for panning purposes, bounce selection maybe for consolidating edits, and for applying and rendering in processing and different automation, then we could use render in place. So let me know if that was helpful. All right, so we have Frito saying hello. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see from Ace Amadeus, hi Greg, can we import SysX backups from DX7 into Halion 7? Thanks. So yes, you can in FM Lab. So all you have to do is we'll add your instrument. So let's get to Halion 7. We'll come over to single instrument and we'll open up FM Lab. And as soon as you kind of come right over here, you click on import, and that will read any of the SysX files from DX7, TX7, TX81Z, etc. So you could just import those SysX files and have access to all of your classic content available. All right, so we see from Gareth, he just asked something I've never investigated, is the new/open library features. All right, so when you go to new library, we could think of a library as a audio pool. So we have a pool window. This is a collection of all of our audio files that are used in a particular project. And I first kind of got into the libraries, working with people. I think it was with General Hospital, the soap opera in the United States. And, when they do promos, they always say, tonight on ABC, do this. And next week, next Sunday night, do the next Monday night. And they have all these files, and they have like the little audio tags. So, it's always in 2 days, tomorrow, tonight on ABC, watch this, so they have like these recordings that are always done. So what you could do with a library is an audio pool that's been saved in a particular project. But the pool that we see here is saved with the project. But what a library allows us to do is to have kind of a collection of audio files that could be accessed that maybe we need to use, whether it's kind of a corporate audio tag, whether it's going to be, coming up Saturday, like audio files that they constantly need to use. We could save that as a collection, and we could save that is what's called a library. So we could have a pool that's not associated with a particular project. So if I wanted to take all of the files in this project, and these are my go-to files to come up with a commercial for a client, where, they have, they always say, go to, this Sunday the sale starts, or for President's Day sale, for, Christmas sale. So where they have these recordings and they use those same sound bites every time, those could be saved into a library file, and you could open it up and just drag and drop. So I know people do a lot of advertising work, and they may have a library file for Walmart, one for, Salesforce, one for doing, Best Buy, different clients that they have, where they don't have to open up a particular project. They have every single audio asset that client uses in a particular library, and they could open that up and drag and drop all the files as they need. So they just open up a library, and that's a collection. It's basically a pool that's not associated with a particular project. So it allows you to access, needed files quickly. See, Jeff Zabelski's like number 114. All right, so we see question, is it possible that you could do a quick rundown on all the features in the preferences window? There's so much in there. I know I must be missing out on some pro features, like they're right in front of me. I mean, I could do it, but that would probably take like a whole live stream to go through all of the preferences and kind of explain their particular functions. But I'll make a note to maybe do kind of like a series of videos. So I'm creating kind of a series of tutorials, but I'll see if I could do one kind of breaking down the preferences and what each preference does. But it may not be as appropriate for a live stream, but if you have a particular thing that you don't know, and if it's a preference, I'm happy to show that. But it may be, an entire dedicated live stream just for particular preferences to show that. All right, so we see, hi Greg, do you think that Dorco will ever take advantage of our beloved CC121? I'm not sure. I haven't seen any indications of it, but I have a meeting on Monday. I'm just going to get together for a quick catch up with John Barron, who's kind of like my counterpart on the Dorco team. So I'll see if there's any plans. I'll check with him, but I haven't heard of anything, but it doesn't mean that they won't be doing maybe something like, like a MIDI remote that accepts kind of generic MIDI information for functions. So I know you could do that kind of already. All right, so we see a question. Is there an option to change from the Yamaha note names to the normal English note names so that middle C is C4 and not C3? I could only find an option for Helmholtz or Yamaha naming. So there's always a discrepancy because within the MIDI specification, there's, on a piano keyboard, there are 100, there's 88 keys. And within the MIDI specification, there are 128 keys. So different companies will have middle C as different notes, different note numbers, because the note numbers for a keyboard don't necessarily apply to the note numbers within the MIDI specification, because there are more MIDI note numbers than there are on a piano keyboard. So So there's no way to alter it to change within Cubase, and Steinberg and Yamaha, or at least kind of in sync with that. But that's why you may see a discrepancy. Okay, so you see Lucy Godfrey says, "Hi everyone, I visit here once every 2 weeks. I'm going to try to visit once a week. It feels like the right thing to do." It was great to have you on the Zoom meetup, and glad that you can make it today. It's good to see you again, Lucy, and we hope that you make as many live streams as you can make, and that you get to learn some new tips and tricks for your experimental music. So, all right, hang on a second. My son is in my office and he's playing bass. Let me see if I can get him on a TV show. Hang on, just bear with me for a moment. Sorry for that. My son had a day off for a teacher work day today, so he was, I think, bored and wanting to come to my office and play my basses. All right. All right, so you see from Bruce Bruton, I think this is with the duplicate, bounce, and render place. Says, "Thanks, that explains a lot." See Gerald Ely says he has a TX72. He's going to break out and do some SysX transfers. Yeah. All right. And I think this is dealing with the with the library. So it says, so you could import a whole group of audio samples in one file, or is it a folder? So it could be anywhere. The files could be stored anywhere, but we could think of it as like a reference point. So when we want to open up, so if I come here and we right click, let me just open a different project. So let's say we go to our pool window, and then I think if we just export the pool, all right, and we'll call this, and I'll store this in my desktop. Okay, so I go back to my jump off project. So now I want to open a library, and we'll go to our desktop. Just and now here are all the files that I needed for that we'll call my corporate ID audio tags. And then I have all of my files that are used in this particular project. So you say, okay, this is the Geico ad thing. Boom, I could just drop that right in. So at that point, we could have, again, different libraries. So think of it as a collection of, and this may be less musical, but more sound designer. And if you're doing like kind of corporate ad work, it's a phenomenal feature for that. So, Okay, so we see from Kerwin Young says, Greg, I'm having an issue with supervision not matching video timecode. I have 3 bars before bar 0. That may be the cause. Setting timecode at cursor does not fix it. How to resolve? Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at, so let's do 3 bars. Okay, so now when we look at this, we will say, all right, so I'm going to open up let's go to our time display. So we can see that we're starting at measure 5. All right. So say we want to go to measure 1, beat 1. Okay, so, and let me just open up supervision here. Okay, I'll just do new instance here so we can just. Okay, so as we come here, okay, so let's set our time code at cursor. So let's say we want this to be at 0. So I'm going to go, we have a cursor position there. All right, now it says you modified timecode offset. Do you want to keep the current project content at its current timecode position? So I'm going to say no. So now when we do that, we see that the offset is working. So when you do that and you get that message, maybe have it, if you want to keep the content at the current timecode position, try choosing no to that. And it looks like it is showing at the correct time code in our master time code, as well as, let's say, our seconds. So we stop. So as we go to different areas here, we could see that this is all synced up between our different timelines. So give that a try, Kerwin, and let me know if that helps. And great to see you on the live stream, Kerwin. See, Cubase X says, can't blame your son. Would love to play on your basses. Yeah, he likes my Warwicks. So, All right, so we see Gareth asks, is Loop Mash still available anywhere? So it wasn't being updated by the development team. So with that, it's not in Cubase 12. There are, the Loop Mash FX plugin is still available. So if you go to, other on Loop Mash FX, so if you want to use kind of more of like the performance effects, you can see the Loop Mash, but the instrument is no longer coming with Cubase 12. Some people have found a way, and I'm sure you could Google it. It's not officially supported of copying a file from Cubase 11 to Cubase 12 folder and getting some of those instruments to show up. So, but it's not officially supported. So, but if you needed to do it, you could open up projects in Cubase 11 and use that and render it quickly, or kind of, use Google as your friend. All right, so we see Jazz Dude just saying, rest in peace to Wayne Shorter. So yeah, it was a sad loss. Wonderful musician. Okay, so we see from Jeweler to Rocket. I'm not sure if I asked this question or not, but can we choose different automation styles? Usually it's a list where you can choose from quickly if I have several forms. So yeah, if you just look right here in the automation panel, you could select between, crossover, auto latch, or touch. And if you go to the automation panel, you could also put in trim automation. So you could just use some of those different functions right there. All right, so we see from Michael Pierce, if anyone knows, if I alter the delay on a track to shift it back or forwards in times, does it change the waveform as well to show that change? So it doesn't show it visually. It's just going to only show it on the, so it doesn't reflect it visually. So when I come, so let's say if I go to this particular file and we adjust it, we'll zoom in. Here we'll say down to the sample level roughly. So as I adjust this, we'll notice that that's just going to play back at a different time. But if you need it to actually change that, what you could do is if you wanted to change your master timeline, if you wanted to adjust the start by milliseconds or seconds, you could just come directly onto the event here, and you could adjust using the lines. So if you need to see it visually line up, you can say, okay, I need this to start at, 1 sample or 1 millisecond, depending what your frame rate is or what your time division is. So if you want to see it adjust by samples, you could adjust the start and end position. If we zoom in more, let's say we're adjusting it by samples here, we could adjust by that. So you could see it visually just by adjusting the position from the timeline, but this is just kind of an overall playback. We can think of this like Michael Wagner would use this often to kind of give like a kick drum a little more time to hit the compressor a bit earlier. So people would just use that for an audible change, but not visual. So, but you could select it and switch your time format right there. See, Nick just says, wow, Greg is a genius, clearly. So I'm just an Oompa Loompa in the world of Willy Wonkas. See, Kerwin Young says, wow, thanks, Greg. I need to try a few things in. Thanks again. It's always great to be here. We're always so wonderful. It's always wonderful to have you here, Kerwin. Kerwin, be our celebrity attendee today. All right, so John Barry asks, hi, Greg. I've forgotten how to set the quantize snap point to a position that is not the start of the file. Example, something like a reverse symbol where you want this snap on the end and not the beginning. Okay, so let me just reverse this. Okay, so let's go over to media, and let me just find okay, so say I drag this into the file and I want to reverse it. So we'll come over here. All right, so we want like the end to snap. So let's say I'll just come here and let me just make it so it's not snapping already. So I'll just, all right, so what you do is double click and we could launch it into the sample editor. Okay, so you need to, I think it's critical that when we come here, that you need to set this to, you see a lot of times you may set this to show clips and you don't see it, but if we have this on, and this is changed in Cubase 12, but if you go to show events, at this point you see the snap point in the sample editor, and I could move this to, let's say, the very end. And now when we have this set to snap by hitting the letter J, now it's the end that snaps as opposed to the beginning. Let me just change the length of this. So now at that particular snap point, it's the end point that's going to be the snap basis. One other way to do this, so let's say we have our snap at the beginning of the file. If we move our cursor, let's say, right, so let's say we want like our files right here in our cursor. Let's say we want our snap point to be right there. We go to audio, and then there's a snap point to cursor on the selected file. So now that we've done that and we enable snap, again by hitting the letter J, we could just move and then the snap point is set. So you could do it in the sample editor, or again, just select the event, move the cursor over to it. And now audio snap point to cursor. And that will then move the snap point wherever you want it to. So you don't even have to go into the sample editor. You can if you want. All right, so Alex Mendoza asks, in the add track menu, I can't select chord track. It's not selectable. Is there any other way to add a chord track? So generally when you see this and you see chord track, it's like, oh, it's not there. And it's probably because you have a chord track in the project already. So if you just search here, if you hit like, I think it's Control F, and just type in chord, then it should take you to the chord track. But if there is no chord track, so let's say if I remove this particular track, so I can remove my chord track, I will come here, I can see that I could add a chord track once a chord track is already available and resident in the project. come over here, you'll see that it's not available. And if you don't see a chord track there, go to the visibility and make sure that the chord track isn't hidden. So if you go to the visibility tab here in the inspector, so give that a try. Okay. So we see from Jeweler to Rocket, maybe about the automation. It's actually a list to have automation pictures. How's that you can choose from? I'm not going to name DAWs, just but the actual way it take time. So I'm not sure if, so we have our automation modes here, but if you wanted to draw in like automation events, really all you'd have to do is, so once you're here and we're in the automation lane, is maybe just drawing in, your different tools. So once you go to your draw tool, maybe it's like the automation shapes and say, okay, now I want to draw in square waves. So let me know if it's something like that. See Sable Winters, it's like, Greg, thanks for sound design tips. You see that Michael Pierce is up. He's up to date on his Willy Wonka songs. So impressive to know the lyrics. All right. Okay, looks like Kerwin maybe got him and Nick maybe got it sorted out for their offsets. All right, so I think I'm caught up on questions. All right, so I know we had some questions that were mailed in advance. Let me get to those before we run out of time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And again, if you have questions you need to email in advance, you could always send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So let's go ahead and all right, so we had a question. Is it possible to flip the Q mixes down to faders? All right, so let's get this set up. And I guess this is down to faders on the MIDI remote, on the MIDI remote. All right, so let me just open up. Okay, so let's say we have, and this is like an easy way of doing different Q mixes for, using our MIDI remote layer. So I'll revert this. Okay, so let's say in our project here we have, bass, drums, guitars, all right, and we have our We have our cue mixes set up accordingly here. So basically we've created our cue mixes. So we go to our studio, to audio connections, and we have our control room. We've right-clicked and added cues. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is, I'm going to select all the tracks in the project. And we'll go into kind of our large format console by hitting F3. We're going to go to the racks and make sure cues are activated. So all the tracks are selected. Now what I want to do is right click and we'll say all cues. So I'm going to activate the cue sends and all the channels. And I want to use the current mix levels. So if people want a more me style mix, and I want to use the current pan levels. So right now our cue mixes are kind of set up for a more me headphone mix, so everything is kind of the same. So what we want to do is to actually take the MIDI remote and use the MIDI remote to control our cue levels. So I'm going to come to my Korg Nano control here, and we have eight sliders. So I want to use these sliders for, let's say, cue mix 1 on the first 8 tracks to be able to bank over to channels 9 through 16, 17 through 24, etc. So once we do this, I'm going to create, let's go to our mapping assistant. I'm going to create a new page. So we'll call this cue mix. We'll say flip cues to faders. I'll say flip Q1 to fader. Okay, so we're going to hit OK. So we have kind of when we created a new mapping page, this basically just took all of the parameters that were assigned and cleared them out. So I have kind of like the, almost like the framework of the object defined that matches my control surface. And now I could define the particular parameters in the mapping assistant. So what I want to do is we'll go to Mix Console, and I'm going to say our mixer bank zone. So I'm going to say Setup. And I want this number to actually match the number of faders that are on my control surface. So if I have 4 faders, I would choose 4. If I have 16 faders, choose 16. So I have 8 faders, I'm going to select 8. Then we're going to go to channels, and we'll go to channel 1, and then I want to go to cue sends, Q1, and let's set level. So I'm going to move my physical knob and say, okay, double click. And again, that is assigned. So I want to go to now channel 2. And let's set our cue sends. All right, so we'll come here. Enable. Okay, so let's go to channel 3. So I move fader 3. Cue sends, Q1. Level. Okay. Okay, so we'll go to 4. All right, let's go to 5. Six. All right, and I would, if I want to do this for cue send 2, 3, and 4, I would just simply create a new mapping page, and instead of just selecting Q1, I would select Q2, Q3, Q4, etc. So we'll go to cue sends 1, and let's get to level. And cue send 8. So we'll go to channel 8 rather, and we'll set our level here. Okay, so now I have these controlling all of my levels. And what I want to do is I have 2 buttons here on my MIDI remote, and I want to set these for banks. So we're going to go to we'll go to our mix console, and we'll say mixer bank zone action. So I want to say next mixer bank. I can hit this button here on my nano control. That's my next mixer bank. Okay, hit this button, and I want this to be previous mixer bank. Okay, so let's go to our mixer. And as we do this, I'm going to control QSend1 just by moving my faders. So you see now QSend1 is being changed. And then if I hit the bank button on my control surface, now that switches to channels 9 through 16. I go back. So at this point, if I put, let me just put, see if we can get both of these visible at once. So as I move my faders, I see QSends here moving, and then bank over, and now it'll just bank through my different channels as I hit the bank button. So I could assign a button to go to a different mapping page and have that flip Q2 to fader, flip Q3 to fader, flip Q4 to fader. And then you could control all of your different Q and your headphone mix levels using kind of a generic MIDI remote controller. So that's how you could work that. All right, so we have a question. Is there a means of seeing at a glance all of the MIDI channels that have been used and what instrument/track name they relate to? I'm thinking there be maybe a panel or dashboard that could provide that. That way I could easily know what I should assign my next instrument/track name to, or can you tell me how you or others organize this kind of data? So most people kind of utilize templates for this, especially when dealing with large projects, but let me just take a look at something that may give you some insight, maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but look. I'm not sure if it'll show all the input and output channels, but let's try going to the project browser. You know, I mean, you could obviously just kind of open it up and get a sense of, you know, location, like the routing and instruments that are being utilized. And if you go into the mixer and have the routing, you know, but it may not show the MIDI channel per se. But let's see if you can see anything kind of in. Let's go to the project browser. This may give us kind of maybe a little more of an overview. So I don't think it shows. So here, let's say for this particular one, like it doesn't necessarily show the MIDI channels, but we could kind of look at all of, you know, the different data on that particular track. But there's nothing that's kind of like a global overview. I mean, most people just kind of set up their template, and then they could visually see what's being used and not used that way. But I'll pass it along as a suggestion nonetheless. All right, and this is kind of a follow-up question to last week. So let me, I'm sorry, I'll skip that. And this was about a question with Groove Agent. So let me just go to this project here. All right, so this question was when that some groove agent patterns, when dragged in, and it specifically mentioned like forget the past. So let's say we drag this pattern in, let's say pattern 1. So I'll drag over this. All right, let me just. All right, so we're going to drag this pattern over. All right, so when, and I think this is from Jan, and what he had mentioned was when he watches it, that as it's playing, he's noticed that the pattern is actually triggering this F sharp 1/2 time pattern, even though it's playing this pattern. And the reason why is sometimes some of the patterns may have MIDI notes that go kind of out of the range of the particular instruments, because we could have MIDI notes that trigger patterns and MIDI notes that trigger sounds. So sometimes there may be some overlap with this. So what you could do, so right now when you look at this, you think we're just kind of playing a pattern back and using Groove Agent as a sound source. But we see that this pattern here is being triggered in kind of an unexpected way. So we could have a separate MIDI port that just handles patterns from the notes that are sounding. And to turn that on, we just want to turn on Omni, and we just want to turn on this function. And this will create a, instead of having one port that shares MIDI notes between patterns and sounds, this will create a pattern MIDI port and a sounds MIDI port. So now when we play, we see that this isn't triggering at all. But if I put this into a quick loop, but now I deactivate it, and it's probably because within that particular pattern that it's actually just triggering these particular notes. So just turn that on right there, and then you'll see that visual indication go away because the MIDI events are going to be on different patterns. Okay, another question mailed in. Is there any way to route multiple instrument tracks through a single rack VST instrument? I know that you can route multiple MIDI tracks through the same instrument track. So for example, if I have a drum kit or an instrument that has multiple articulations, you can put those all through the same VST. The problem for me is that I'd like to, one, be able to control the audio fader plugin separately per routed track. Two, be able to use different types of instruments out of the same VST. Like I may have a contact instance, I may load a soft synth, a string patch, and a flute. Contact can route this out to different audio channels, and technically Cubase can route them in, but it requires a MIDI input track and an audio output track for each item loaded in Contact. If my question doesn't make sense, please feel free to ask me for clarification, and thank you for doing this. All right, so I think I understand what's going on with the question, but let's take a look at it. Okay, so I'm just open up a quick project here. All right, so I don't have Contact, but I think it'd be very similar to what we're doing here in Hallion. So in Hallion, I have one instance of Hallion Sonic here. So I have one instrument track, and then I added MIDI tracks so that we see Hallion Sonic channel 1. This is a MIDI track that's going out to Hallion Sonic MIDI channel 2, 3, 4, I think all the way through 13. So we have 13 different voices all going into one instrument. So we listen to it. Now, what I've done in this particular instance, so if we wanted to, edit the different sounds, we could see that these are mostly coming from Hallion Sonic SE, but some are from Hallion Sonic Artist. So different sound sets, different instruments. But when we go to, and I'm sure the Contact has something very similar, when we go to mix, at this point, I will just take each of these sounds and I could assign them, and we have 16 instruments at once in Howley Sonic. So we have 16 stereo outputs. So I've assigned each instrument to their own stereo output. So the audio is now being sent to its audio output in my filters for the mixer. So a lot of times you may see MIDI channels, and these MIDI channels are just actually MIDI CC7. But if you don't want to see the MIDI channels, because what you want to see is the actual audio outputs from the instrument, I just choose to hide and filter the MIDI channel view. So now, as I come here, I could solo each instrument and EQ it and put different effects on it in complete isolation without having to worry about the other sources. So these are all feeding 13 stereo outputs from my instrument. So if I go to my instrument channel here, if we wanted to label these as so all of these, we could have the labels show up, and these are all just the audio, the separate audio outputs, and we could do independent EQ effects if we wanted to change the sounds of the particular instruments, inside the instrument. We could do that. So I think really what you need to do is just to set the particular, so you could do it in Howley Sonic very easily, just setting the different outputs and being able to utilize those different outputs and feed the channel so you could have all of your separation. So I think that I'm sure Contact has something very similar that you could do, treat it the same with the same concept. But then you can see all of your audio outputs. You're not dealing with the MIDI. You could have the MIDI CC inside of the part if you wanted to, and not necessarily see it on the mixer, and just have all of the audio outputs from the instrument for individual processing, even though it's coming from a single instrument. All right, so we see, hi Greg, all of a sudden Dorco gives me a message on startup that it can't find the sound content and tells me to install it. The content is in my library manager. All I did recently was update Cubase from 12.05 to 12.052, update Howley Sonic 7 and add colors. I'm running Win 10 machine. Should I clear and reset the cache engine in Dorco preferences, reinstall Dorco? I don't want to do the wrong thing and make it worse. Hoping to hear back soon. Thanks a million. P.S. I tried reinstalling the content as asked, but got a message that was already installed. I briefly went to the forum, but I didn't see this particular situation. So I did check with John Barron, my colleague, on this issue. My Howley Sonic SE still showed up fine without any particular issues, but I'll just share what John had sent to me. So it says they're currently kind of investigating it, and it's with kind of the MediaBay service, some of the MediaBay stuff. So the two solutions are, it says run to start and keep server running script available, which is available on the forums. Or you could uninstall Howley Sonic 7 for now, and he should still then have the Howley Sonic 3.5 SE installed, and all should be good. And if you need the Howley Sonic SE 3.5, it's part of the Dorco SE. And one of the things is, just to be aware of with that is it could, prevent you from running the colors. But on my systems, when I went to Dorco, and this is on Mac, I didn't get a chance to test on my Windows system, but my Dorco is still seeing Howling Sonic SE as the playback engine, but I think it should be sorted out pretty soon. So sorry about that you ran into that. So okay, so you see, greetings, Greg. For some reason in Groove Agent 5, which I just purchased, when I select Load Instruments tab, I'm not seeing the instruments that are part of the loaded kit. Instead, I see just the kits in Groove Agent 5 SE. It works fine. The only way I could do this now is to right-click on the drum pad, and it'll bring up the instruments, but now there's no way to pre-listen. So, and I'm not sure if this is with a Groove Agent SE, like a Beat Agent kit, or an Acoustic Agent kit. But let's take a quick look. So I think, with the Acoustic Agent kits, they're designed to not necessarily replace sounds as easily as an Acoustic Agent, as a Beat Agent kit. So if we have a kit here, something like, we just open this. All right, so let's say I want to find a different kick sound for this. So really all you'd have to do is say, okay, let's go to Instruments. So let me just take a look, and I'm just going to clear that field. So let's say, okay, I want this to be kick. So I'm going to have this selected. So it may default to this kit, but if you just kind of click there and hit backspace, then it'll clear the field. And then you could just kind of audition your different samples. So let me know if that helps. All right, so I think that's all for the questions that were mailed in. Thanks for, again, sending the questions in. So let's go back to our live chat. Okay. Okay, reading through comments here. See, Lucy Godfrey says, thanks, Greg. You must be one of the most knowledgeable people in the world in Cubase. I'm sure there's people that, know it better than I do, but thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. So I'm just glad I get to learn new stuff all the time. All right, so we see, hello everyone, I've installed Cubase and I have a white screen when editing the vocal track. Does anyone know the problem? So, maybe check, just out of curiosity, if you have like a vocal file here, we could double click on it, but check to see like what tab you're in. So, you might want to just select different tabs on the left-hand side, because that could change the view. Like sometimes, I'll get this as like, oh, I can see the waveform, but I can't edit anything. And it's like, okay, maybe if you go to the definition, then you can edit, parts of the audio and do the sample editing. So I would check just the various tabs and try selecting a different tab and see if that changes the appearance. And if you are double-clicking to launch the sample editor, it could also be, if the event is switched to a part, like if you had multiple vocal files here and they were glued together that you double click, and maybe it's a part editor, but it seems like those all still have color. But I would check just to make sure that you have a different tab selected. Okay. Apparently I'm teaching people how to fly a plane, according to Gareth. Okay, so Millennia del Torto. Hi, Greg. Speaking of preferences, I overwrote the P preference, and now I'd like to restore it. Is there a way to restore one preference? So if you want to, so I'm not sure if it's a preference or if it's a key command file. So if it's a preference, any of the preference windows that are selected, you could just click on defaults, and that will take you there. If it is, when you say the P command, maybe that's a keyboard shortcut. So if you go to key commands, what you could do is type in the key. If you hit the letter P, you could see what function. So just click here in the field, hit the key, and you could see what function it is assigned to. And then if you needed to delete it, at that point, just click on the little, delete the selected key command, and then you could freely reassign it to, and the default is locators to selection for the letter P, like Paul. All right, Gareth wants people to remember to splat the like so I could get a tickle. All right, so we see Windy Shore 74. Thanks a million for the move selected events to cursor, Greg. Huge time saver. So. Okay, so we see Groove Trapped just asks, hi, Greg. I'll try explaining my weird problem, which happens infrequently. When I use the chord track and monitor tracks to play along, the voicings automatically keep going to higher octaves. Thanks. So let me know. Let me know if it happens with every instrument or if it's a particular instrument that does that. Like maybe the instrument is maybe like some kind of like emulating a guitar, or if it's doing anything harmonically. But within the chord track, you could test. So let's say we put a chord in here, and we go to the chord track itself, and when you go to set up voicing, here you could also set up like the lowest note and highest note for the particular chords. So maybe if you restrict that range there, maybe that would solve the problem. But let me know if it's with every instrument or if it's with a particular instrument, and maybe that instrument is responding in kind of a special way, we'll call it. All right, so we see Steve Leeds says, recently lost some audio files. They show in recent project menu, but error message on opening the file. So, check if you go into your pool window. It could be that the pool window, they may be in the trash, and you could open the trash and maybe restore them back in. So I'm not sure if the files were deleted from the computer. And if it was deleted from the computer and forever gone and Cubase is still looking for the reference, at that point, I would just right-click and choose to remove unused files. Because if it's not in a project, then it's not going to show up, and then that should stop the error message telling you that you're missing audio files. But just think of, it's still, the project is still looking for audio files there until you tell it not to. All right, just Okay, so we see from John Barry, both the chord track and the MIDI sends connect to an instrument after the instrument track, so you cannot record on either on the track or work around. Could you suggest this were an update? All right. Okay, so both the chord track and MIDI sends connect to an instrument after the instrument track, so you cannot record either on the track or work around. Okay, so I'll suggest as update, but I'll kind of reread the question maybe after the live stream and see if I could understand a little better. Okay, see, nice comment from Cubase X and Spike Williams. Great. Thank you, John Costigan, for the kind words. Okay. As I see from Groove Trap says, thanks, Greg, for the chord track. Regarding only use piano or electric piano-based VSTs. Yes, I'm not sure what would cause it to continue to kind of go up in pitch, because usually it's a pretty fixed pitch of what it's actually doing, what it's actually triggering. All right. See Sable Winters wishing everyone a great weekend. All right, so we'll see if there's any. So I think we're just about out of time. So I want to thank everyone for spending part of your morning, evening, afternoon on the Club Cubase live stream. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick today. So we'll be back on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And if you have questions you want to send it in advance, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And once again, if you have found the Club Cubase live streams helpful, do a little video and share it with us of like how the Club Cubase live streams have helped. And you could do it on your cell phone, a webcam, if you want to do it like kind of landscape mode. Just a quick little thing. We may use it in some marketing material to promote the live stream so we could spread the word and have an even stronger community. Want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. I got to learn some neat tips and tricks myself today, and want everyone to stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see everyone again back on Tuesday. So videos you could share to clubcubase@steinberg.de, send like a WeTransfer, anything like that, any sharing service, and that would be wonderful, and I would appreciate it. So we see that we have 144 likes. It's wonderful. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Goodbye.